Thanks for listening to the Gray Ave Podcast, a show for driven young people with big goals. We meet inspiring people from around the world and learn from them, from entrepreneurship, health, travel, lifestyle, and more. We are also on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher Radio. Rate and write us a review. You can also download each episode on www.grayjabesi.com. Enjoy the show.
Hey, what's up? My name is Gray and this is the Gray Podcast and this is episode number 30. I have to say I'm super excited about this one. I'm super amped. We have a very great guest, a gifted mathematician, a gifted academic, one of the world's most impressive young mathematicians, and a great inspiration and role model by the name of Dr. Jonathan Farley. You might be familiar with his work on television, or you probably heard about his mathematical formula to eliminate ISIS and terror. We'll get deep into all of that, so you will definitely get to understand him a little more. You might think that all we talked about was math in this podcast, but actually that's not true. We actually covered 90% of no mathematics. Since we covered a lot of what you will have something to say about or to comment on, please feel free to comment on the website. You just put in the comment box whatever you think, and that's going to help a lot to keep the conversation. And also I will send some material to my subscribers. So if you haven't subscribed yet, you just have to subscribe via iTunes or my website. You just have to punch in your email address, then I will be able to send you Dr. John's contact. As he say in the podcast, that if you really want to contact him to ask some of the things that he talked about, you can contact him directly. So I will send the contact details to Dr. Farley to my subscribers. And if you haven't subscribed, as I said, just go to www.grayjabesi.com. There is a join page right there. You just have to join. To give you more details, Dr. Jonathan Farley has been a visiting professor of mathematics at California Institute of Technology, a science fellow at Stanford University Center of International Security and Cooperation, a visiting scholar in the Department of Mathematics at Harvard University, and a visiting associate professor of applied mathematics at MIT, or Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Dr. John is also a consultant in Hollywood, where he has worked on films like Elementary, which is the TV series, Elementary, Numbers. He has also worked on the animated movie Flatland with folks like Kristen Bell and Martin Sheen. So this podcast is really interesting for a number of reasons. One of it being John thinks really, really differently. And for that, he raised a few points that I actually raised my eyebrows about. And I really would want to hear your opinions and your thoughts on some of the things that we covered in this podcast. Just to give you some highlights, that a few that stands out for me. He said feminism is hurting women. He said Obama is a war criminal. He should be charged for murder. He met Rubik, who is the creator of the Rubik's Cube, and asked him an interesting question, and which the answer is really fascinating and interesting to hear. So it's all in the podcast. He also thinks marriage isn't worth it for men anymore. He also thinks alimony should be eliminated. Our conversation went along those lines, as you can tell, and if there is anything that is not covered in this, we did a part 2. So all the other things that weren't covered in the part 1 were covered in part 2. You just gotta look out for that. And if you have anything to say, which I'm sure you will have something to say, just drop it in the comments on any platform you're listening to this, whether it's on SoundCloud or you listening on my website, grayjabesi.com. I will appreciate your answer, your questions, or your comments on this very subject. Enjoy, guys, and see you next week. So how is it going like there with today Trump is being made president, right?
Yes, exactly. In about an hour.
Okay, right. What's your take on that?
It's hard to say because our media is just full of propaganda, and it is true that the media is mostly controlled by liberals, and so what they publish is not true. The New York Times, CNN, the conservatives, the Republican Party, Trump's party, they joked that CNN was the Clinton News Network, after Hillary Clinton, his opponent in the election. But in fact, it was. You could watch and see that the supposedly neutral moderators were always taking the side of Hillary whenever possible and spouting lies about Donald Trump. For example, in one of the debates, Anderson Cooper, a very popular commentator on CNN, was talking about how Trump had assaulted women or had bragged about assaulting women when, in fact, that hadn't happened at all. Anderson Cooper should have actually been fired after that. So you can't judge what's really happening from the media. That's the reason why the Democratic Party, Obama's party, lost the election, because the media wasn't telling the truth about what the American people actually thought. I myself could care less. Both parties are bad. Right. But certainly, as the article you mentioned from the British publication talking about my work in counterterrorism said, I'd be willing to work with a Trump administration on matters of interest to me. And I would certainly stand a better chance of getting the attention of the Trump administration than a Hillary Clinton administration, regardless of how good my ideas or bad were.
Right. That's interesting to know, because on the outside, generally people who are not in the United States like myself, we obviously get the whole hyped up media feed of what's happening. So I think for most people, their assumptions are wrong of what's actually going on. Because if I speak to somebody who is actually there, their view on it is pretty different from the outside. Everybody who isn't in the States right now, they're like, "Oh, you Americans, so your shit together," or stuff like that. They just think things are going the most negative way possible.
Yeah, that's because the media is controlled by the people who hate Trump right now. In fact, one of our major television networks, CBS, the head of CBS has a brother who worked, I think, directly for Obama. So, and there are many, many other media connections like that. So it's not surprising that the media was pro-Obama, pro-Hillary Clinton, with the exception of maybe one or two right-wing networks or stations, forums.
Right. And what do you think of Obama himself?
Obama is actually a war criminal. He should be brought in front of The Hague, tried for murder. He assassinated even a 16-year-old, a U.S. citizen, without charge, no explanation. He assassinated another U.S. citizen without charge. He reserves the right to legally assassinate U.S. citizens without charge. He has, of course, kept hundreds of people in a gulag just by calling them terrorists. No proof is necessary. And tortured people, although he claims that he ended torture, but they just call it by a different name, I guess, or pretend that it's not happening. Not to mention his disastrous foreign policy, invading Libya, essentially invading Syria. They actually are literally now talking about sending U.S. troops to fight in Syria. Killing, who knows, hundreds of thousands of people. Certainly when you destabilize a country like Libya, it's hard to do the body count. The civil war in Syria certainly prolonged thanks to Obama. So that meant more people dying. So yes, he was, and not to mention his role in the violent coup in Ukraine, trying to fight a war or stir up a war with Russia. All of that's terrible. And in terms of his domestic policies, his support for groups with alternative lifestyles against the wishes of the majority of the American people and the people of the world, actually, and trying to impose his views on African countries at the risk of withdrawing aid if they don't submit to Obama's view of groups with alternative lifestyles. No, in South Africa you do because it's in the Constitution, but it's not in most other African countries. That was also not only anti-democratic, but profoundly immoral. So I don't have a positive view of him, in summary.
Right. That's very interesting and quite uncommon coming from you. But then that's, most people would agree with you on that, just because I think most people do like Obama, but they wouldn't actually give you the actual reasons why they do. Or usually people that have reasons are the ones that don't like him. It seems to go that way. What do you think generally about politics in general?
In America, or in the world, on Mars?
No, I mean in general in the rest of the world, on Earth.
I'm afraid I'm no longer really familiar with what is going on in the United Kingdom. I used to, because I lived there for several years. And I did live in Austria, but since I don't speak German, I didn't really know what was going on. I met politicians who I think were supposed to be conservative, but I quite like them. But maybe I can say a bit more about Austria. I love Austria. I consider it the greatest country on the earth. I've only lived in a few countries, but I think I've seen maybe 20 or maybe more. And the problem with Austria is that because they waged war against the planet 70 years ago, they now feel obligated to admit anyone into the country without really, just admit anyone as an asylum seeker if they just say, I need asylum. Now, this hasn't happened so much in Austria as it has in Germany, but it's I almost sound like one of those right-wing bigots, but it's ruining Austria. At least it was ruining Austria. It would have, I'm sure, ruined Austria if they continued at the same pace when I was living there about 7 years ago. So in order to preserve Austria as a great country, they should not just give anyone asylum. Proper asylum seekers, yeah, they should get it, but not just anybody who says, I need asylum. There's no war going on in, well, actually now in Ethiopia there's trouble, but say, and in Nigeria there's trouble. But several years ago, there wasn't such trouble. And so just because someone is coming from a poor country doesn't mean that they should be just let in.
Right. So, coming back to Obama on that story, what do you think makes for the conventional thinking that happens that most people like Obama, but you happen to not like him? What do you think it's about that fact?
Well, I will say that I was very happy when Obama got elected. Basically, you could say racism in America, you could put on the headstone, racism in America, 1776 to 2008. And so I was actually extremely happy, and I'm still happy that America finally elected an African American. It's just that I knew when I wrote this at the time, just because you have a black person doesn't mean that their policies are going to be good. In fact, typically it means their policies are going to be bad because they'll be trying harder not to appear like Malcolm X or something like that. And there's no danger. No one is confusing Barack Obama with Malcolm X. So that's the problem. And many African Americans followed the Pied Piper simply because the guy is black. So they don't do this with radicals. They run away from radicals. But they are inclined to forgive the sins of lots of people who at least appear democratic, like they're just because they have black skin. And it's a shame that African Americans do that. Also, Barack Obama does have charisma. He is quite affable. He has a sense of humor, and that all works to his advantage. Like, I believe he writes his speeches. I don't think that a committee comes up with the turns of phrase that Obama does. It's just that his speeches are usually empty. If you really think about what he means when he says, for example, he'll talk about change. Okay, well, what change exactly? Or he'll talk about the founding documents, how the credo of yes, you can was written into the founding documents. It sounds nice when he says it, better than the way I just said it. But if you really think about it, it was nonsense what he said. There was no phrase, yes, we can, written into the Constitution of the United States.
Right. So I'm not political at all. I really don't like politics at all, simply because I actually haven't seen a perfect set of government or political party. It seems like whatever government is there, wherever in the world, you still have problems of where people are not happy with it. And I don't expect it to be perfect, but it seems like I think it's more like a game played by a few set of people, and so it will always be the same because it's the same people just doing the same things, kind of counteracting each other in the fight for power or something.
Yeah, the skills required to be a successful politician are not the same skills that are required to run a state successfully. That's the problem.
Oh, that's a very good wording there. That's a very good way to put it. Then
thanks.
what would you be your ideal government or set of leadership?
The ideal leadership, mostly a cast of people who are dead. Like Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, they had the right ideas. Huey Newton, before his, the psychological warfare that the CIA waged on him, had the right ideas. So people like that. Actually, over 20 years ago, before the elections in South Africa in 1994, I did see a representative of the ANC when I was at Oxford. And I remember thinking, probably for the first time, and I think the only time, I don't think I've met anyone like that since, I thought, I'd follow this guy. And so, but maybe more because he was a freedom fighter rather than, I don't know what his tax policies would have been. Maybe I wouldn't have been so thrilled by that. Yeah, not too many politicians actually are really that great. There are some who are charismatic and they can give good speeches, but are they really that great? Like Kennedy, John F. Kennedy gave great speeches, but he also wasn't fully on board with civil rights for African Americans. So is he really that great? Not really.
Right. And actually, speaking of speeches, I'm not a political fanatic, but I have to say that I like Trump's speeches because they sound more honest, that he is actually saying the things, It's not like the Hillary Clinton, Obama thing where that it's written and they're just reading. They had to edit it and tell them what to actually, the right things to appear. Actually, Trump sounds like a guy who just stood up and is actually speaking his mind.
Yes. In fact, that was my impression when he announced his candidacy. I listened to his speech. I think it was about 40 minutes long. And that was the first speech by a politician in years that I'd actually wanted to listen to. When Obama speaks, he's much more eloquent, but I have no interest in listening to his speech because I know it's just going to be a bunch of empty turns of phrase.
Right. So going back to the ideal politics thing, if we had, I know that I don't like the current political system, the judicial system, but I don't, even the education system, as I told you last time, but I don't know the ideal set of government that would work. What would be your ideas of what a set of government system that would work perfectly?
Well, there's this phrase, which I guess Churchill may have said, about how democracy is the worst form of government except for everything else. So I certainly wouldn't want a democratic form of government. I like the idea that you have some protections from purely mob rule. So you have representatives who then do the business of government. But how you prevent corruption, I really have no idea. So I guess I can't really say what I think the ideal form of government would be. I used to be involved in politics. I used to think it was really necessary. I did math because I loved math, but I thought it was necessary for me to be involved in politics. But now I don't really care so much. So yes, I read Plato's Republic, but I'm not really so, and I'm not so consumed by these issues now. Now I'm interested more in enhancing my own personal wealth.
Yeah. And how
doing math.
And how are you going about doing that?
Well, I'm doing that because in a couple of ways. One is I have an educational consulting nonprofit. Well, it's a nonprofit, so you're not supposed to get wealthy, but um, one is called Axum Educational Solutions, and then I started something called Girls Equal Math. And I should point out that I'm just speaking here as an individual, not on behalf of any of these organizations that I belong to. But a few years ago, I did consulting for a school district. I taught some advanced math courses to a select group of students. And so that's one way. Another way is that I have a company called Hollywood Math and Science Film Consulting. I never really intended for that to make me a millionaire. But we have consulted for, say, a film with Kristen Bell, and Martin Sheen, animated film, and, for several TV shows, like Elementary or the TV show Numbers. These are crime, dramas that on occasion involve some mathematics. And we hope to have a big score at some point where we have a major blockbuster that wants us to, be the consultants. So those are two ways I'm going about doing it.
So what kind of what kind of work exactly do you do in Hollywood, for example? Specifically, how do you consult with the film industry? Do they have? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so the director of a film called Flatland, the movie, the animated film starring Kristen Bell and Martin Sheen and Michael York, they contacted us, if I remember correctly, and just wanted to go over parts of their script. And we also created educational worksheets that teachers could download and use with their students related to the film. And the makers of the movie said that over a million students have watched their film. It's an animated film, so it's more for school kids or for kids generally. Everyone could watch it. I thought it was actually quite exciting, but it's mainly for kids. So that's one example. And with the TV show Numbers, which is a very popular show, was on that same major American network, CBS, that I mentioned for about 5 years. They also followed up on a suggestion that I had given them of working with the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics and developing worksheets that teachers could use in conjunction with the television show.
Oh, right. That sounds more interesting. I didn't thought that movies would go that kind of direction, I guess.
Yeah, they generally don't, but sometimes they're smart enough to pay attention.
Right. So, I like your thinking on how you look at politics and how you analyze the rest of it. How do you consume media? Do you read newspapers or websites, or
mostly websites? But I try not to read newspapers because it's poison for the soul, and I don't watch television news for the same reason. You know, they say if it bleeds, it leads, and I'd much rather watch a comedy program. So as much as I like spending time with my mother when I'm visiting, as I am now, when she watches the news, I leave the television room because I don't want to consume that. I don't want my brain or subconscious to feed on all that negativity. But yes, I can't help but surf the internet, and so I might look at some headlines when I'm going through Yahoo, the main page. But that's about it.
Right. And on a day like this, it's 21 minutes past 11 in the States now. What does your day look like forward, or what have you been doing for the rest of the morning?
Well, I did just wake up. I wasn't asleep, but I did just wake up because I stay up late. But I'll watch the inauguration, and then I'll do a couple hours of math. And perhaps my mother will want to do something like watch a movie, but then I'll go to the gym for an hour or two in the evening, and then I'll continue with more math, or we often watch a program called Shark Tank. I'm sure there must be a similar program in South Africa where a bunch of investors will listen to entrepreneurs making their pitches, and then they'll decide whether or not to give the entrepreneurs the money that they want in exchange for a percentage of their business. And so I really like that show.
That's my favorite show, actually. Second favorite
Yeah.
show, yeah. My
Yeah.
first one is Silicon Valley, and then I watch Shark Tank a lot. I love it.
Okay, yeah.
Right.
So,
Okay, go ahead.
well, Silicon Valley's on HBO, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't have HBO, but I like Shark Tank.
Oh, okay. I watch all of them. You just kind of pirate all of them on the internet.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't really have
Yeah.
enough time to watch TV on a certain set of time. Anyway, so what kind of people do you hang around with?
That's an excellent question. Well, I'm hanging around my mother right now, and one of my friends from when I was back in 5th grade, so age 10, he also became a mathematician, and so and he lives in the same area that I grew up in. So when I'm visiting my parents' house, I'll hang out with him. He also is part of a couple of the businesses that I have. When I'm at my place of work, on occasion, I'll have lunch with my colleagues. I actually enjoy having lunch with them. It's the first institution I've belonged to, really, where I really enjoy having lunch and conversations with all my colleagues. And otherwise, I will spend time in my apartment, wasting time really surfing the internet, watching TV shows like The Flash, and also reading mathematics. So I spend a lot of time doing that.
Right. And in what other ways do you use your type of thinking? In what other unconventional ways do you think being a mathematician kind of helps you to think differently, or your approach on things?
Well, it does help me when I'm consuming news, because I can see when someone is making a bad argument. For example, last night I was watching a politician from the Democratic Party in the United States talk about how they could appeal to more individuals, more Americans. And he's talked about reaching out to Trump supporters, and that's the way the Democratic Party could win. And so I could analyze this and go, well, that's actually an invalid conclusion, because while 100 million people cast votes in America each presidential election, there are 100 million more people who could vote who don't. And so the Democratic Party could actually try to appeal to those people, but it doesn't even occur to them, which is why they lose. But my mathematical training helps me analyze invalid arguments.
That sounds really interesting. And when you want to learn new things, for example, how do you... first of all, do you play chess?
I played chess as a boy. I haven't played it in several decades.
All right.
My father played chess.
Okay, cool. And do you solve the Rubik's Cube?
I have never solved the Rubik's Cube, so no, I don't know how to do that. But it does relate to very interesting mathematics. There's a field of math called group theory, but I myself do not know how to solve a Rubik's Cube. I did meet Rubik. I went to a conference for art and math in Hungary 7 years ago, and Rubik himself was there. So I asked him a question, which in retrospect probably was not a very politic question for me to ask, but I basically asked him if he got royalties or if he regrets not getting royalties, something like that.
Very good question. What did he say?
His response was such that it didn't seem like he understood my question. But again, in retrospect, I think that he did understand my question, and maybe he just thought it was too embarrassing to answer. But that's just my speculation.
All right. So he didn't get any royalties from that, right?
I think he actually is Hungarian, and so I don't see that he could have gotten any under the communist system. But I forget exactly what I asked him. Maybe I asked him about what happens after, but after it all fell apart, what happened after. But my impression was that he didn't get anything.
Oops. That's not very good news.
Yeah.
So say you want to learn to solve a Rubik's Cube or anything new. How do you approach that? How do you learn a new, whether it's a language or a new skill or anything like that?
Well, I'm learning German. Of course, I've been learning German for 9 years, and I haven't learned it yet. But I have CDs that you can play in your car. And so so if I'm making a long trip, as I did recently, I was driving for 6, 7 hours. So I could play the Learn German in Your Car CDs. And also I have many books. I have so many Teach Yourself German books. At some point I will go through them all. But I got the initial ones when I was taking a course on German as a foreign language in Austria when I moved there in 2008. So that's the approach I would take to learning German. That's the approach I am taking to learning German.
Right. So you seem like you move around a lot. Like you've lived in Austria for a little bit, and you lived among other places as well.
Yes.
How do you manage to handle things that require you to stay at one place? For example, relationships or business, or some things like that actually ground a lot of people to stay on one place.
Well, my business is consulting, so that could be done anywhere. In fact, when I did the consulting for the TV show Medium, actually I did meet some of the people, but I did the work, I think, before I met anyone. So a lot of it can be done remotely. And also, for relationships, obviously it's much more difficult because in fact, it's actually quite interesting. Before I left for Austria, about 3 weeks before, I actually met someone who was actually great. But I was leaving in 3 weeks' time. So that's the problem.
So, okay, on a problem like that, then how do you make the decision? How do you value each of the two to actually see which one is more viable or more lucrative?
Well, I didn't have a choice. I had a new job, so I had to go to Austria.
Okay.
Yeah. But ultimately, obviously, what's important is, again, we're getting back to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You need food and shelter. You need money in order to obtain those things in our civilization. But people also need companionship, love. And so ultimately that is more important once those other needs have been met. But in this case, there wasn't an option.
Right. So getting back to the video that you were commenting on Maureen McGrath, there's a video on YouTube for the people listening with Maureen McGrath. It's called No Sex Marriage. She was on my podcast also, actually, so the people can check that out. So you had very interesting points there. It was kind of unconventional and counterintuitive to what most people were saying. To one guy who was complaining in the comments that he hasn't been having a good marriage for 9 years, and he was looking for a divorce or something. So you had pretty much interesting things to say about that. Could you just elaborate if you can recall to what I'm talking about?
Well, if I want to, I should also point out that you and I share another perspective, that this is not a subject I feel comfortable talking about. I don't even like using the S word. So when I talk about that television program with Carrie and Samantha, and I actually never even say the title of that TV show, even though I watched many episodes. I just never say the title. So This will be an interesting discussion where I'll try to avoid using that particular word. But what I'd like to say is there's something else I like to do. Even though I am not an expert on relationships, I actually like the idea of helping people. I'm a man, so I know more about what men in the West are going through. I don't know about that much about dating in South Africa.
It's pretty much the same, I can tell you.
Okay. But I know quite a bit about America, and Britain is, I think, sort of in between. I know a little bit about Central Europe, and there is a crisis, and the crisis is that it's just not worth. I also don't want anyone to think that I might be commenting on any particular relationship I might or might not be in currently. I don't kiss and tell, or even in the past. But objectively, I think you can say marriage isn't worth it for men in America. I'll stick with America, but what I say might, as you indicate, apply to other countries too. It's just not worth it. And so when I read about people like this man that you mentioned, who's been in this terrible situation for 9 years, it's too bad that he didn't get out of it 8.5 years ago. I will say, and this is what's certainly unconventional, there's a reason why the term wifely duty was used. I think we can accept, I'm not a medical doctor, that women are less interested in, let's say, the physical aspect than men are, but whether men are biologically wired to need it or not, certainly men have lost kingdoms and prime ministerships and presidencies almost over it. So it's clearly a powerful drive. And it's also the drive that causes men to do stupid things in order to impress women, which led to the creation of our civilization. And you can go back to even myth with Helen of Troy. So men will do crazy things in order to fulfill this urge. And it's not just physical, actually. So it's not just that. Men do like to please women, whether or not they get something physical as a result of it. But men have needs, and it shouldn't be something shameful for us to say this. And so in a marriage, men have to get something out of it. And maybe I could be like Socrates and ask, what do men today get out of marriage? And I don't mean in my parents' generation where it was clear. My parents were married for 49 years before my father passed away. But today, what do men get out of marriage? There might be some exception, a great marriage between two people, but in general, what do men get out of marriage?
That's a very good, interesting question. I think they would have kids, pretty much.
Yeah. So now the stigma is being lessened of having children outside of wedlock. But yes, if men want kids, it's best to do it within a marriage. However, it's not men who are usually pining to have kids. There's no 5-year-old boy who is playing with a doll, right? There's no 9-year-old boy who is planning out his wedding, right? So these are things that are mainly for women. Like, I've never met a man who had an urge to have kids. I know men will talk about having a family and kids because it's been traditionally expected of us to move from stage to stage. And women change, men haven't, or, to a certain extent. But I don't really think that men are driven by the urge to have kids.
Right. That's a very interesting way to think about it. I mean, I would agree on one point of saying a man planning a wedding and stuff. I mean, I don't even see myself doing one, or I don't even have the thing of saying, oh, I would do this wedding. It's going to be like this and that. That's actually one thing that I would try not to do. Or most men I know, they wouldn't actually want to do it.
100% of men, in fact. I'm willing to, maybe rounding up from 99.99%. So these are things for women. But unfortunately, in our modern age, thanks to feminism, all the things that men do for women have been forgotten, ignored. Right. So just the other day, I saw a complaint about how I think the Trump administration wants to eliminate 25 programs dealing with violence against women. And violence is defined in a very general way. So stalking is included in violence, even though technically stalking isn't violence. It might not be good, but it's not violence. But men also protect women from violence. 90% of policemen are men. 90% of firemen are men. 90% of the people in the military are men. That probably goes for every country, maybe even higher in most countries outside of the United States. Other than, And so all of that is just ignored, right? Similarly, in a marriage, the women get everything that they want. They get the very expensive wedding, which no man is interested in, which might even put the young couple into debt. They get the constant money, right? So the man, I remember reading this article. It actually incensed me. About a man who made a spreadsheet of all the excuses his wife gave him for not engaging in marital relations. That's the term I actually use. And it's the proper term because this is what's supposed to happen in a marriage. His wife made a series of excuses, apparently going back months, for why they couldn't have marital relations. And he made a spreadsheet, showed it to his wife. And what did his wife do? She uploaded it to the internet and mocked her own husband. So the women get what they want. She got the security. She got the marital relationship, which enabled her to have kids without scorn from her parents. And of course, her husband, while she might engage in marital relations once a month or less, her husband is not paying for her only once a month. He's paying for her 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And even if they get a divorce, which in this case I'm sure is inevitable, she would continue to get money. There's something called alimony. So it's probably the same in every part of the United States, but I was looking at the information for one particular state, and they even ask if the wife is going to get alimony, or the spouse, but we all know it's the wife who's getting it. I think in 97% of cases, it's the wife who gets alimony, not the husband. They were asking for it. So even if the wife wasn't thinking of getting money from the husband that she was about to divorce, she would be thinking about it. So why is this, if we are living in a feminist era where men and women are supposed to be treated equally, are they even talking about something like alimony? So when they get a divorce, and this is an important point, the man still has to pay the wife, still has to give a huge amount of money to his wife, not for child support, just for alimony. Whereas, does the wife have to engage in marital relations with her ex-husband maybe once a week? Can the judge in their divorce proceeding rule that? No, of course not. That would be considered absolutely absurd. So the women get what they want out of a relationship, which is money, basically. But the men don't get what we want out of relationships. And nor are we even allowed to say that that's what we want, because it's considered so wrong.
Absolutely. Especially on that forum, the point that most men were making was that they're being ignored the things that they actually need, they actually feel that they want, and they feel that they, in a way, entitled to them, like physical marital intimacy, or whatever you can call it. Physical,
yes.
Whatever interactions in marriage, and it
yes.
makes it's to the point where it makes them feel like they're outrageous big victims, in a way that they want something so much that they actually, some of them are called addicts by feminists, just because
yes.
they want that. Which is a pity, and as you said, that the women get what they want, and then. And some of the guys actually some of the people in the forum also made a point saying, there's an odd saying that says, sorry if this the S word offends you, but it says, sex ends the moment she says yes, or she put a ring on it,
yes,
or something like that.
Correct, yeah, and so, well, you can use it. It's fine. I just choose not to. I just will use the same concept. So this is exactly correct. It's the saying, and it's a funny saying until you're in that situation, and then it's not so funny anymore because you're locked into this monogamous relationship. Maybe Solomon had less trouble, but today you're locked into a monogamous relationship, and therefore, thanks to feminism, actually, because in the past people understood that, okay, you have a wife, you honor that wife. She passes her, the saying is that men age like wine, women age like milk. Women are, and I'll just stick with 18 because that's what our society does. but women are beautiful from 18, maybe up to 25, 26, perhaps 29. But you don't, in the past, you didn't simply discard your wife when she was no longer physically attractive, and you stayed married to her for another 40, 50 years, depending on how many McDonald's French fries you ate on a regular basis. So for starters, it requires women to get married earlier. Now I think the median age of first marriage for women is something like 26, which in many cultures, like in China, I've heard, they say that basically something like, well, they wouldn't say this exactly, but there's no Christmas after 25 because you're supposed to be married by then. Or in Russia, I knew a woman who said that her grandmother was pestering her on a regular basis because she wasn't married yet, and she was 24. In America, thanks to feminism, women would consider getting married at 24 or 22, like people in my mother's generation, to be insanely young. They get married, like some of my friends, when they're 29, 30, but that's close to their sell-by date. And then they wonder why these relationships aren't as good as they would like, or why they don't last. And there's a woman who goes by the name the Princeton Mom, who wrote a book on this topic, and she was attacked by the liberal media in America, but every point that she made pretty much was correct. And she didn't really say that women should get married young, but you could infer that point from what she wrote, and it's actually great advice. So the advice that I have is helpful to men, and it's helpful to women if they really want to have relationships like the ones that their parents, or in the case of young people today, their grandparents had. It was where there was an understanding that there are wifely duties. That doesn't make the wife a prostitute, because you don't marry a prostitute. So that simple charge by the feminists can be dismissed out of hand. Whereas one can argue that a wife who does not engage in marital relations with her husband is actually the one who has no respect for him. And so it's actually a bad relationship, not just because there's nothing physical going on. It's actually a bad relationship. So today I want men to be able to say, this is what we want. We want a return to this past way of this past way of formulating a marriage. There are marital relations going on a regular basis, and women get what they want: a husband who adores them and is willing to go through a burning building to save them. But instead, the women will say, no, we have feminism. This is terrible. Anything men want is bad, which is basically what their argument is. Therefore, we can do whatever we want. There's no head of the family, even though you have much less of an incentive to stay with us past 35. As a result, there's a divorce rate of 50% in the United States, which means that more than 50% of marriages are bad, because as you saw in the comment section beneath that video, a lot of men stay in bad marriages.
Absolutely. I was actually shocked to see that. It was one of the things that actually made me question more. It's just like, is marriage really a good investment? If it is,
it's not. You can do an analysis. Some economists wrote a spoof article many years ago saying that prostitution was actually a better investment than marriage. And it was a spoof article, but you could actually do the math and see that it checks out depending on what country you're talking about. Because a man doesn't care if he is driving a jalopy, a beat up vehicle. He doesn't care. Right. He gets the nice new car to impress women. A man can live in a dirty apartment, or maybe not dirty, but an apartment which isn't, doesn't have all the latest devices, and he doesn't need a house in the country with a big yard. All of that is for women, for a wife. Men don't need any of that stuff. So you actually are saving lots of money by not being married. And then when you get married, you can wind up like the man that you mentioned,
Yeah.
9 years in a relationship where your wife doesn't touch you. That could happen at any moment. You have no warning. Feminists have told women that this is all perfectly okay, and a man has no right to even expect anything from you. And then you're stuck because of the way the divorce laws are set up with alimony. So then if you leave, you could actually wind up paying still half your salary to this woman who hated you and essentially tricked you, because these aren't women who were virgins when they were getting married. They were in our parents' generation, but today they aren't. So these women knew what they were doing when before to rope the man in, and then afterwards said, okay, now I've got him. So all of these systems need to change. I would say beginning with alimony, it should be eliminated. There should be a campaign to completely eliminate it. Child support, okay, that's a separate issue, but there should be no such concept as alimony in the law. Yeah, it's as simple as that.
So, it's pretty sad that these kind of conversations aren't the ones that people are talking about, even though that's actually what most people think about, especially men. But, with the whole movement against men almost right now in the background, people don't even want to talk about it. They're scared, or they feel that if they talk about it, there will be pointed fingers at, or names will be attached to them just because they actually talking about how they feel. But like, online is actually a great platform where people can come out because they feel that they're anonymous, and so they talk about everything. I don't think this.
Well, I use my name, which is how you found me.
Oh yeah, sure. And this guy on this forum, actually, for example, I don't think he would go out and in a group of people and talk about it and talk about this.
No, he wouldn't.
Yeah, actually, I will read his message, his comment on the forum that day. It said, "I would gladly show this video to my wife of 9+ years, but she would probably scream at me that, I do not wish to speak to you about sex. If you don't like our relationship, then get a divorce." So after more than 9 years, where the sex was only great before marriage, and it almost stopped immediately after she said, "I do," which is the odd joke, but I'm sorry to say it is only too true. So my choice at this point in my life is to divorce, or hang it up, or cheat. Sorry to say, those are the only 3 choices for all of us married men. If I met a woman over the age of 40 whom was really passionate, I would leave my marriage tomorrow. That's really sad and real right there.
Yes, and that's the way it is. And I looked up some statistics, and apparently 20% of marriages are in that situation. So it really is an epidemic. And if they're in that situation where the couples are having marital relations 10 times a year or less, then it's still going to be bad for even more than 20% of all marriages. So it's actually an epidemic. And what the women don't realize, because they're led by the Pied Piper feminists, is that this hurts them. There's a reason why in 1960, some 60% of couples, or 60% of people under 30 were married, and now it's only 20%. The reason is because I think men have figured out that marriage is not worth it. The risks are too great. Women can change immediately after saying "I do," and so the men don't get what they want, but the women continue to get what they want, which is the money. And if that's, that's clear because only 30% of wives make more than their husbands, and it was less than 20% 30 years ago. 75% of women say they wouldn't even consider dating an unemployed man, whereas 100% of men would consider dating an unemployed woman. So it's clear that the women are interested in money and the men aren't. The Cinderella story is not about how Cinderella met a really nice guy who is a custodian in the palace, but a nice guy. That's not what the Cinderella story is about. So the women get what they want, but the men are no longer getting what we want. But here's the thing. Again, thanks to feminism, women now give away the milk for free. And therefore, men, I was a nerd when I was a kid. I didn't even go out on a date till I was age 26.
Wow.
And so and I don't think I even had a conversation with a woman lasting more than a minute until I was in graduate school. So if you other than a relative, like, a girl who I actually could conceivably date. So but then I figured out these various secrets and tricks, and they do work. I'm not going to name any specific person whose ideas are better than others, but, in general, whatever the pickup artists say actually works. I can confirm that it really is the case that nice guys finish last, and young women especially like the bad boys. And so women have dealt themselves a devastating blow because people like myself, particularly if you're a former science nerd, meaning you're more analytical, we figure it out and then there's no going back. So
I can relate to that. Yeah, what you're saying.
Yeah, many men can. I wrote something for Essence magazine, which is a magazine for African American women, about this. It's called Players and Professors. But at the time, I didn't quite understand what was happening. Why were these women dating men who were in jail? And it wasn't that they were more handsome. They could have had scars or something like that, but they were the literal thugs. Just regardless of their own personal background, they could have had the same family background as myself. Their parents were university professors or something like that. And yet they preferred these men. What's going on? And then I decided to start being bad like that, not to the extent of going to jail, of course.
Right.
But and then the difference was night and day. It was actually quite incredible. It was disgusting to me, in fact. I even did this experiment with the same person, where first I was the bad boy, and then I decided to be my normal self. And as the bad boy, I won't, I don't kiss and tell, but I got the desired reaction. And then as the nice guy, she was dismissive. And so it was almost like a scientific experiment. And I could see that, this is how it's happening. So this is a big problem. You don't see this with other cultures. So when you, in America, see the Chinese computer science student, he can have a girlfriend or a wife who's quite attractive. You'll never see that in America. Right. So what's wrong with American culture? There's clearly something wrong. Or even the age factor. This man, I think on that forum, I told him that he could date someone who's 20. I myself in my 30s or even in my 40s have dated women who are 19, 20. And I'm not James Dean. I'm not Urkel, but I'm not James Dean. So it's possible for anyone when you learn these techniques, well, not possible for anyone, but it is possible. It is possible. I won't say how likely, but it is possible when you learn these techniques, but they mostly apply to women in other countries, not in America, where an age difference of 8 years is considered gigantic. But in Russia, say you could be with someone who is half your age. The only problem is if you're not in Russia, you're stuck in America and you might want to date someone who's in America. It's not so easy to go to Russia. And then if you do go to Russia, you don't know if the person just wants the green card or if they're a member of the mafia or something like that, which actually is there's a reasonable chance of that being the case. So that's the problem if you're stuck in America. But the culture in America is diseased. The relations between men and women have been poisoned by feminism, and it hurts women. It doesn't hurt the women who hate men, who might play for the other team, like they say on the TV show Seinfeld, but it does hurt the vast majority of women who want to get married and have children, because they've turned men in our culture into bad boys or want to be bad boys, or got men who will soon realize, whether it's at age 26 or sooner, that they get further as bad boys than they would as the men who worship women and want to put them on a pedestal. So it's quite terrible for American women especially. but they don't realize it.
The thing is, those problems are almost in a lot of places simply because our cultures, the culture is becoming more global, because of the internet, and the world feel a little smaller, so the exchange of
Yes.
cultures through art and music and stuff. So it's a little bit similar. And just to point out on I grew up a nerd as well. I mean, internally, I'm an ultimate nerd. I like my time, and I'm an introvert. But also, I went through a phase where I had to catch up and read about all the social stuff in a way that, as you said, you can kind of technically, it's almost mathematical in a certain way, where you can actually, there are buttons you can press to make something work. I read a few
Yes.
books. I read a few books, like the pick up artist stuff that you said. I read a few books on that. One of it could be The Rational Male. A very good book.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's a really good book. I read a few books like that. So it became something that, for women specifically, it became something that I can turn on and off. Just like you said, like play the bad boy, and then you can also become yourself when you want. I did a test on online dating, actually. So I made two profiles on some online dating site, one for a male and one for a female.
Interesting.
Yeah, a very beautiful picture of a female. I had to ask somebody actually who is pretty good looking. So I saw what kind of messages the women receive and what kind of messages men receive. So I thought of myself, like, if I was this woman, which one of these would I reply to? So I saw, and then I did a little bit of background hacking and see which kind of messages get a response and which kind of men and pictures get a response. So I could see that, okay, this guy and this guy. If I see somebody send me a message, pretty good message, I'll do some background checks, and it would show me their response rate, how much they get responded back from women. So I would see guys from like 60 to 80%. So I would just copy exactly what those guys do. I did the same. It was just working.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. I love it. You could become a millionaire.
Oh, tell me about it.
Because this information is gold to millions of men. This information, you should write a book immediately.
Yeah, maybe I should think about it.
Yeah, you should write a book. I'll be happy to edit it for you.
Cool.
So you should write a book immediately on this. You could make a lot of money.
All right. It was really funny. It was just like I was just taking what these other guys do and do the same. And it was working, because there's a theory that I believe that I heard somewhere. I think I read in a book that says you must just look at the best and just try to imitate what they do. You're not going to be them, but you'll be like something about 50 to 60% what they are in a way.
Yeah, that's a good philosophy of life. But when it comes to dating Western women, it is sad that you can actually follow some blueprint and it works a lot of the time. I mean, even like there are no Casanovas. Even the people who are the best pickup artists fail most of the time. But there are techniques that you can use to increase your chances. And the sad fact is they work. Like today, not being too interested. It's the kiss of death to be too interested in a woman before she has expressed interest in you. It's weird. It's counterproductive. It doesn't help women. But because since the women do prefer the men who are not interested in them, what are they going to wind up with? Men who are not interested in them. Okay. So, what we did is a brilliant idea, and it's a sad fact that there are techniques you can use to increase your chances with American women, particularly not being too excited in them, which pretty much guarantees that a woman is going to wind up with a husband who is not as interested in her. So it hurts women that they have somehow allowed themselves to be reprogrammed in this fashion. You don't find it, I think, in other countries. For example, there are mail order bride services that a lot of Russian women employ, and they're openly saying, yes, I want to get married, as opposed to this dance that one has to do on American dating websites like Match.com, where once a woman even told me that she responded to me, and then I wrote her back suggesting that we have a a call in a couple of days. And she thought that was too pushy. Like, you're on a dating website. She responds to my message. I suggest that we have a phone call in 2 days, and that's too pushy.
So, just to take off a little bit of a tangent here, why didn't you use the S word or sex in your vocabulary?
That's just how I was raised. As you said before in one of your other podcasts, it's not even a topic that I feel comfortable discussing. It's just that society has reached this crisis point now. As I said, 20% of people under 30 now are married, down from 60% 50 years ago. The divorce rate is 50%. It certainly wasn't that way in my parents' generation or the grandparents' generation of the grandparents of the young people today. So there's a disastrous situation. You see a lot of men who are dissatisfied with the way relations are. As Rush V, he doesn't call himself a pickup artist, but he is. As Rush V has stated, did our fathers have to work this hard just to get a date? Turning it into a numbers question. When I was on the internet dating website Match.com, I wrote, I don't know how many, probably literally 1,000, 2,000 messages. In the most recent time period when I did that, it didn't even result in dates. Whereas on a Russian mail order bride website, you could send a few hundred messages, and you could actually even meet some of these people if you're willing to fly over. And they weren't out of shape old women who are desperate to have children. They could be 19, 20, very attractive women who actually, some cases, literally models. Now, you don't know if they are genuine or if they just want permanent residency in the United States or if they're connected with the mafia. But the situation is radically different between a traditional culture like Russia and a feminist culture like the United States in the 21st century. There's a real problem. Well, here's how I would analyze it. You have a tiny minority of feminists, people like Andrea Dworkin, Catherine McKinnon. These are people who hate men. In many cases, they don't want men because they play for the other team. But they're the most strident, perhaps because they're mentally unbalanced. I don't know. Well, they are mentally imbalanced, but they're the most strident. They are the Pied Pipers and lead other women, because in America, only 23% of women call themselves feminists. I think it's even lower in Great Britain. I don't know what the numbers are in South Africa. But they lead the other women down the garden path and don't realize that these other women want to destroy relations between women and men. The feminists do, because they hate men. But the people who pay the price are the other women who want relationships with men, who want to have children without being scorned by their parents, even if they don't care about having kids out of wedlock. Their parents do, because their parents bothered to get married. Who want relationships that last 50 years, marriage did, but now they don't get it. They're the ones who are actually harmed. So yeah, they'll say a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, but it's just a lie. Women need men who are policemen. Women need men who are in the military. Women need men who are firemen. Women need men because they actually want someone who's going to buy that $5,000 diamond ring, who's going to buy that house with a white picket fence, which for some reason they don't want to buy themselves. They want someone to buy it for them. I think it's 84%, according to Forbes magazine, 84% of women want to be stay-at-home mothers. They aspire to be stay-at-home mothers. Well, okay, when they're stay-at-home mothers, that means they need somebody who's going to pay for all of that. So they actually want men. They actually do need men. But the situation is such that there's nothing in it for men anymore. There is for a man to get married and give such a woman the white picket fence for a variety of reasons. One is they don't actually respect the husband anymore. They don't feel the need because they'll then claim, well, there's no head of the household. Therefore, what's the point? They ignore the fact that they need men more than the men need them in all areas except for one. But now, because they give the milk away for free, the man, when he reaches 35, can then find a 20-year-old. The woman, when she reaches 35, has no one except for the man that she, if she was smart, married when she was 22. But if there's nothing there's no warmth in that relationship for the husband, why does he need to stick around? The only reason is the negative impetus, that is alimony. The woman can compel him to continue to pay for her for the rest of her life. But those laws should change. As soon as those laws do change, then they'll lose all control over men, and there'll be pretty much no incentive for men to marry unless the women en masse decide to return to this traditional way of thinking, which is what I am advocating. It's a way of thinking that helps men and women. The women just haven't fully comprehended that yet. I also want to point out that the men that the women prefer, who have a lot of money, they also have recognized this now, and they will just go to Asia, to Russia, Eastern Europe, Africa, Latin America, places where women still have the traditional type of thinking, the traditional relations between men and women, husbands and wives. That kind of thinking is now gone from the United States. And so you'll see an epidemic of essentially spinsters in the United States because of this, as the men that they would prefer decide to take their hard-earned cash and if they want to get married, which is still sort of a mistake, they'll find a foreign bride, a non-American bride.
Wow. Actually, taking back on that, you actually made a comment in the forum saying this other woman came and said that, well, there are also women with money and men without money, and the marriage still works, and the woman works, provide everything, and the man is actually in there for the money. So you came in and you commented saying the American man who marries for money is an extremely rare creature. Every female wants financial independence, and yet Forbes magazine reports 84% of American women aspire to be stay-at-home moms. It's another example of the discrepancy between what American women say they want and what they actually want. Funny how Funny how no man minds taking care of women. We don't consider the stay-at-home mom a freeloader. This has nothing to do with having been hurt, you said.
Yes. Well, so that comment reflects two common objections. One is the idea that men and women are the same. The men and women aren't the same. They have different interests, and that is perfectly fine. There's no reason why. Why are there so few female politicians, for example? Women are more than half of the electorate, but only 20% of women in the House of Representatives, or I think Parliament in the United States, in Great Britain, are women. Well, American University in Washington, D.C. Did a study, and they said that women just don't want to run for office. It's as simple as that. Now, one can come up with some reasons why. My theory is simply that men don't just want to run for office. We acquire wealth and we acquire power in order to impress women. There are some people who are genuinely interested in just doing whatever it is they want to do. But for the most part, as I said in the beginning of the interview, we don't need a fancy car. I certainly don't. I don't need a fancy place to live. But I know that women want these things. I don't need expensive furniture. A futon would suit me, but it wouldn't suit a wife. So we spend the money on these other things in order to get women. The feminists don't understand this. They think that it's some exciting club being a politician or whatever. And that's why they want to break into those arenas or want 50% representation in Congress or Parliament. But women understand that they just don't have that drive. They don't need it because Prince Charming will come along and pay for them. So the saying that feminists hate, is it better for your daughter to be smart than pretty? And the answer is it's better for your daughter to be pretty because some man will come along and pay for everything. And smart, no one is against a Marie Curie. What they are against is a Liz Lemon from the TV show 30 Rock, someone who is just snide and sarcastic. If you go to Match.com, probably 60% of women in their 20s talk about how sarcastic they are. Sarcasm, I think it's been said, it's the lowest form of humor. It's not even really humor. It's just insulting people. What man wants to be with that? Versus, say, the typical Chinese woman. One of my favorite videos is a video of a Chinese woman giving her husband a foot massage in an airport. Someone thought this was so weird that he filmed it, but apparently it's not so weird. Everyone is going to prefer that wife, the Chinese wife who's giving her husband a foot massage, to Liz Lemon, who is full of sarcasm and snark. But in America, that's pretty much all you find. And a lot of guys are desperate because of the 80-20 rule, where it's more like 90-10 rule. 90% of women want 10% of the guys. And so they're very desperate. But eventually these guys, especially if they're science nerds and analytical, they figure it all out. And then the women are left with nobody. So one woman who I said I wouldn't kiss and tell. I never kissed this girl anyway. But one woman that I knew when I didn't know anything about dating, called me up some 20 years later, and oh, what a surprise! You know, she's unmarried. She was interested in, at the time, dating people who had been to jail, even though she university educated, her parents, university professors or the like. But it didn't work out after 20 years for her. But for me, it still worked out. I could date women who were her age back then. Now.
Yeah, that's really hard mathematics right there.
But they don't understand that, and only people like the Princeton mom tell them this. And their feminists, because now this has been going on for several generations, their feminist mothers don't give them this warning that your chief value is your youth, your youthful beauty, but even it's not even just that you have to look like Kate Upton. They could just look how they are, and but that's their chief value, being pleasant. Traditional virtues that you might still find exhibited in China, and what people like Andrea Dworkin are telling them to behave like, that's not going to get them a husband, certainly not a good husband. In other countries, there are men who are willing to be with women just because they're wealthy. In Jamaica, you find this phenomenon of the beach boy. You may have heard of the novel How Stella Got Her Groove Back. That happened in real life to the author of that novel. She met some Jamaican beach bum who was half her age, but it turned out he played for the other team. So that's the kind of person that women are going to meet if they think they can turn the tables and they can become wealthy and powerful, and they'll have all kinds of men flocking to them. They won't.
Sorry, I never
But
heard.
the best.
Sorry.
Yeah, How Stella Got Her Groove Back.
Yeah, send me a link to that story. I need to check it out.
Yeah, it's not very good. It's just it was just a very popular novel at the time, and before the author's husband came out of the closet that he was probably that way, and I was proven right. But most women love it when feminized women in America love it when they think the tables are turned and women get to act like men. And you see this a lot in movies now, where women are punching men out. So a 90-pound woman is punching out some 200-pound security guard in an action movie. They love that kind of thing, but it remains firmly in the realm of fantasy. In the real world, a lot of women still like the traditional relations, but they're finding it harder and harder to get because they've shot themselves in the foot following these Pied Pipers.
So it's common now that a lot of guys, as you have said, they're figured it out, especially men who are really worthy in a way or smart. I read a book recently about Larry Ellison. He actually put up a prenup on the day of his wedding for the woman to sign. And to the women there and other people around the wedding, it was like unheard of. Like, you just can't do that. Mm-hmm. Because they thought, or critics online say, no, that's like your best day of your life. You should bring up this sad story of like assuming maybe one day we'll break up. But to me, that's just like black and white clear. You know that there's a 50% chance that you might get divorced. Why did you want to protect your worth? And that goes to both the woman and the man. And by the way, Larry Ellison is the founder of Oracle, if you don't know about him.
I like to think positively, and so I don't like the idea of prenuptial agreements for that reason. But at the same time, and also I know that many prenuptial agreements women have ways of breaking them. So people might think that it's ironclad protection, but it's actually not. The best protection is to not get married at all. But the longer one lives, you see clearly that women are interested in money. Like there's the song by Tone Loc 20 years ago, "You got no money, you got no car, then you got no woman, and there you are." Or as the colloquial expression is in the United States, "No money, no honey." So it's crystal clear. Many men were willing to accept that as long as they got something in return. Part of it would be the wifely duty. Part of it would be devotion by the wife to the husband. And it's really mainly devotion by the husband, devotion of the husband toward the wife because the husband is the one who stays with her when she's 35 to 80. Everything has gotten turned around. So you have feminists saying that marriage is bad for women when marriage is great for women. But men are beginning to realize that marriage is bad for men because women have allowed the situation to become so bad. They now think they can not have marital relations with the man they're married to, and that's perfectly acceptable, or they will grudgingly do it once a year. There was a movie by the comedian Chris Rock called "I Think I Love My Wife," where that was the case. The wife stopped having marital relations with her husband, and we were supposed to think that was acceptable. It's not acceptable. That should be cause for divorce, and with the woman getting nothing. We've already agreed that there should be no alimony, but that should be cause for divorce. But it's not viewed as that, not even by a lot of men, regrettably. So it's considered okay for the woman to get everything she wants, the security from a marriage, and especially being able to raise children in a marriage, the money that the husband brings, because the husband almost always makes more than the wife. And in upper middle class or certainly upper class circles, the woman even gets paid for entirely. So it's all expenses paid vacation for the wife. And according to people like the chief operating officer of Facebook, Sheryl Sandberg, she doesn't even think that women should have to do chores at home. And so they don't have to do anything but get everything monetarily. They don't even have to show respect to the husband. There's been a large number of commercials where the man or husband or father is a dodo in the commercial and the wife is super smart. So there's no respect. There's no father knows best idea anymore. There's nothing in it for men anymore other than the inertia of tradition. And even that is dissipating. And then women in maybe another generation will figure out that they made a big mistake.
So I grew up in Malawi, as I told you last time, for example. And in a lot of African countries, women marry for the same reasons, obviously, as the Western, saying money and power. Usually money because they want status and good well-being, basically, just that they can be taken care of. But then what I grew up witnessing was that a lot of them were being abused in certain ways, and they would just stay in because they didn't have had a choice. You know, so don't you
Well,
think that's a consequence that comes when women become more reliant on men sometimes?
I say that right now we have the opposite situation. That man that you were quoting was staying in the relationship, maybe out of misguided loyalty, but also because he knew that he would be taken to the cleaners financially if he left because of alimony. So right now, men are staying in bad, rotten, awful marriages because they are financially chained. They feel they don't have the freedom financially to leave the marriage. So that's the situation we have now. Men are the ones locked into marriages because they don't feel they can leave financially. What I say is, let's go back to the traditional way of marriage. It worked for my parents, my grandparents. It's not working for the people who are my age group or younger. It's not working clearly now with the change. So what men got something out of the relationship and women got something out of the relationship. They both got something that they wanted. The men got, they both want companionship, I would assume, but men also do want marital relations. Women got money. They also wanted security. They got that. So let's go back to that situation.
Right. So getting back to the prenuptial agreement that I brought up, my argument there was I don't know how it is like in the United States right now, but here there's still this emotional sense about marriage as being too glorified. You know, it's just like when you mention weddings or marriage, it's just like people think butterflies and all that stuff. That the whole logical or analytical sense side of it get eliminated quickly. Like the argument about the prenups is just like, no, you shouldn't bring up assumptions of saying, oh, maybe one day we might break up and I want to protect myself. You just should go inside it without even thinking about it, which I think that's
Well,
usually very disastrous. I personally think that because as the divorce rates in most places are like 50%, I mean, that's for sure that there's a chance that that might happen.
well, I believe in the idea that thoughts can become things, as they say. So I try not to go into situations with a negative outlook. So if you're expecting a divorce and you have a prenup, I think, yeah, it's not going to be a surprise if you do get a divorce. But someone who's rich knows that women are just interested in him for his money. This guy was a nerd 20 years ago, and he probably had no women. He probably had no dates.
Absolutely.
And now that he's a billionaire, the most beautiful women are pretending to be interested in him. So of course he has no respect for that. I'm just surprised that he even got married at all.
Yeah, he
And
got married like three times, I think.
Okay, I see. Well, Leonardo DiCaprio has the right idea. And there's a quote attributed to Donald Trump. He may have actually said it. And he said, he talks about treating women like blank, another word that starts with S. And of course, people bash him for having said that. But all that matters is, does it work? And anyone who has experimented with different ways of trying to approach women knows it does work empirically. Whether it should work is whether you want it to work, irrelevant. The simple fact is, empirically, that's what everybody finds. And it's not surprising that a billionaire like Trump might just have contempt for women because he knows for a fact that they're only interested in him because he has $1 billion. But that's the kind of man that women are creating now because they have contempt for the nice guy, absolute hatred of the nice guy, and they flock towards the bad boys, including people with actual criminal records, as I indicated. And they hate the guy who would actually love them with a courtly type of, courtly love, who is willing to write sonnets for them. That kind of guy, the young woman of today in America hates. Right. And so, surprise, surprise, they wind up with guys who they don't like, and who may even treat them badly. That's one reason why I'm less sympathetic towards those relationships. I wonder how many guys who are nice did those women reject, and then they wind up with a guy who treats them indifferently or worse. But getting back to the situation of women who might feel stuck in a relationship, I say that's adulthood. In what other situation can you make an investment, and then if the company goes bankrupt, say, I want my money back? In what other situation can you do that? You can't.
You can't.
And the man is making an investment too. He's saying, I am giving up the life of Leonardo DiCaprio, where I could have 20 different women every day, to be with this one woman who is, as people have said crassly, I admit, a depreciating asset, because at 35, she won't look the way she looked at 19. But I'm going to commit to staying with her till she's 85. That man is losing something too. Not to mention, he's going to be the one who's working when his wife is a stay-at-home mom on her all expenses paid vacation. So it's a ridiculous idea that only women are losing when they go into marriage. No, only women are gaining when they get married.
Yeah, that's a very interesting look.
Yeah.
You was about to say something?
Well, I'm trying to give a solution. The solution is to go back to the way it was for our parents' generation, at least my parents' generation.
But then do you think that would work if we have equality financially?
Only for this reason would it not work. It's because, now I'm not an economist, but I suspect one reason why you can't have women staying at home so easily now is that women entered the workforce, and so employers could cut wages. They've got twice as many people to choose from. But that isn't the situation that women want, as that Forbes magazine survey shows. But, if a man doesn't have a problem dating a successful woman, this is a myth. The problem is that the successful woman does have a problem dating him. I love that statistic that says 75% of women wouldn't even consider dating an unemployed man. Not a lazy man, just someone who's unemployed. Because you can be unemployed for all kinds of reasons outside of your control. But they don't even want to consider that. The other problem, the real problem, is that women think that if they are in a superior situation financially, that they are superior, and they lose respect for the man. And that's what creates problems in the relationship. But men don't think that way. A man doesn't care if the woman is employed or not. And a man will continue to love a woman who is nice and respectful, even when her main asset goes away.
Right. So we did a podcast, episode 20, for the people listening. It's called Blesser and the Blessee. We talked about a situation in Cape Town specifically, where you get some clubs or bars where women are pretty much expensive places to be in. Women just go there without having no money at all. Not all women, obviously, but some women. In fact, actually, most of them. They just go and they sit somewhere around the corner, and then there's usually a few men in those places where they book a table and just buy drinks, and then most women come surrounding them. It's not always that these women can't pay for themselves, but it's just like there's a sense of saying, well, the man has to pay in a certain way. So if you have that kind of situation, it already creates an imbalance of where if you are the guy buying those things, you're making an investment. This is the reality of it. If you analyze it properly, you find that you're actually making an investment. So then the expectations of this guy is usually to sleep with one of these women. So if I bring out this phenomenon to a lot of women around me, they actually deny it. They say, no, that's not their thing. These women just there to have fun. They don't want to do anything with anyone. So I'm like, why do you think somebody is just buying them drinks who doesn't even know you? I don't know what you think about that.
It's part of the double think that many women have. As you said earlier, and as I've said, and many people have said, women will say they want this, 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 or this in a mate, but in reality, they don't. So they'll say they want a nice guy, but in reality, they want the guy with a criminal record, the bad boy. Sometimes they'll be honest and say that they really want the bad boy. So you do find lots of women who go to clubs in America or Britain wearing super short skirts, tight dresses, and they actually are saying that they're just there to have fun.
Yeah, it's exactly
that they're not there.
yeah.
They're not there to meet guys. Okay, then why don't you dance in a potato sack? Why don't you dance in your own apartment? You could invite your friends to your own apartment and just dance then, if you're not there to meet guys. But as you'll find on websites like Kings, there's been a change in the mindset. In the past, a woman would go to a dance, and even the traditional dance from 50 years ago, it is part of the mating ritual. It's not crass, it's not crude, but obviously it is part of the mating ritual because you have boys dancing with girls.
Absolutely.
But it's civilized. That's just how it is. We know that in a marriage there are marital relations, but you don't talk about them. But now women are feel entitled to have all the stuff bought for them. And they're almost more contemptuous of the man who buys them drinks, at least in America. I don't know about these clubs in Cape Town. I did go to a club in Cape Town, but I was there with people I knew, so I didn't really see what else was happening with the people from Cape Town. Well, one woman was from Cape Town, yeah. But in American clubs, the women are almost more contemptuous of the guys who spend money on them.
Yeah.
And that's why this basic strategy of not being like that works. You know, if you're not the guy who is tripping over himself to buy them drinks, then they like you more.
Absolutely.
And how can I blame feminism on this? There's got to be some way. Here's how. It's because women are no longer expected. Women are now looser. They can give milk away for free. It's not considered a disgrace to be associating with men that you're not related to. And so all kinds of men approach them. They become saturated with this idea. So it's no longer a big deal to them. The big deal is the guy who isn't tripping over himself to win their favor. So that unusual guy is the guy that gets their attention, but it's a mistake because the guy who's not interested in them just might not be interested in them. And so they waste their energy pursuing the guy who likes them less than the computer nerd who would have been willing to work 80 hours a week just to buy her a house with a white picket fence, who would have been completely devoted to her, who would never even consider cheating on her. And instead, the women today like the guy who has 20 different women floating around him and isn't going to be loyal to any of them.
And I think when the nerd figures out the algorithm, so to say, he's not going to actually more likely stick around with one because he has figured it out, you know?
Correct. Correct.
So with your unconventional thinking, you seem to have a lot of it. How does that go with your circle of friends, for example, or other people in general around you?
I don't really. It doesn't really affect the people around me because the people around me, I think, are either they have traditional marriages, they're older in some cases, or they got married a long time ago. So it doesn't really affect my circle of friends. But my thinking actually is now more conventional. There are lots of men who say exactly what I am saying.
Absolutely, but the thing is, sorry to cut you off there, but the thing is, most men think like that, but they don't talk like that. You know, most people don't even
they don't talk
about
like
these
it.
things.
Yeah, they've been shamed into silence, and that's because women have a monopoly on the word that I don't want to say. And so men know that if they say it, they'll be cut off, or they think they'll be cut off. And there are many feminist shaming tactics that are used. So if you know these, then they don't have as much power. For example, it will be said that the man who says what I say is bitter, or that he can't get women, or that he lives in the basement of his mother's house, that kind of
Yeah,
thing,
that's quite common.
or he's
Yeah, I
ugly.
hear it.
Yeah. So they say the same things over and over again. What they don't realize is that they then are contradicting themselves, because they're admitting that they value a man if he has lots of women,
And
which is what they tell us, that you shouldn't be valued based on whether or not you can score with lots of women. But they're admitting to us that, in fact, that is how they evaluate men themselves. And there have been scientific studies where women are shown photographs of men, and they're told, on the one hand, if the man has a relationship, on the other hand, he doesn't have a relationship. And the study concludes that the women prefer the men who are in relationships.
I like to give this example on that. Like, there's this thing of studs or players. So my question is like, why do these guys are players because they get more women, right? So
Yes.
how does it happen that they get more women? If women know that they're players, it's just so crazy. It's obviously because women like men that actually get more women. That's pretty
Yes,
obvious,
they
right?
do. Yeah, they do. And in some cases, they'll say, no, I'm disgusted by that. But
Usually they
in
say that.
fact, they're not. Yeah, they will say it simply to preserve, because we still have the traditional thinking. 50 years of feminism hasn't destroyed the fact that women don't want to be sleeping with 100 guys. Feminism has tried to make that normal with movies like Amy Schumer's Trainwreck, but women still don't want to be like that. They don't want to be like Madonna. But they are increasingly becoming like that in America. But so they'll say they don't want such guys, but in reality, they do want such guys.
Right. So, and how does it go with you in relationships, for example? And also, if you ever decide to have kids at one point, how are you going to go about it? Because you don't like the idea of marriage.
Well, I don't want to talk about myself so much, but what I would say is that even if you do want to get married, which is a mistake, as we've pointed out, unfortunately, in America, the best way to go about it is to be like the bad boy. And so you do want to learn all of these techniques that people have written about in many, many books now. And there are many, many websites on the internet where men can learn how should they actually behave. And that prepares them to get the best women that, the woman that they want. So even if they do want to marry someone, they now need to be prepared. Otherwise, they'll be the nice guy who gets dismissed, rejected by the girl that they do want. But, and I'm happy to help, anyone who wants to contact me with advice. Not that I do think I have this expertise. I'm not a Casanova, but I have lots of hard-won expertise that I'm happy to share with people who have specific questions. And there are women who I think would have good advice, like Janet Bloomfield on the internet. I think she would have good advice for men who want to find good wives. But my advice for anyone in America is to go east, young man, and find a woman from a traditional society, maybe Malawi. And if you're an internet entrepreneur, you could even try to set up yet another. See, there are many dating websites, but there aren't so many mail order bride websites.
Actually, that's a good idea.
And so, yeah, so someone could set something like that up for Malawi, traditional wife. The danger I sense is the woman who is only interested in getting permanent residency in the United States, or in the case of Russia, someone who might be part of the mafia. And so that's a very real danger, which is why I no longer advocate even mail order bride services. But the reality is the women do exist. They're not just pictures. And so you can actually meet them. But you don't know what is really in their minds. That's the problem with dating someone in another country, because you can't really figure them out from 11,000 kilometers away and get
So,
a sense of how genuine are they.
right. So there are a lot of guys who feel this way, but they are in a relationship or they have aspirations of getting married one day at one point. What advice would you give to them, or what should they consider before they make any big moves?
They should, if they're already in a relationship, then it's kind of bad because they may not want to replace the person. But unfortunately for women today, the attitude of next, where next becomes a verb, that actually is the greatest power men have. If you have this attitude that the woman isn't particularly important, then somehow that makes you more, the women somehow like that more. They shouldn't, but they do. And that's the reason why, whether or not you like being a Casanova or consider it sinful somehow, you have an advantage when you have lots of women to choose from, because then no one particular woman is so important. I wish it weren't the case, but I used to have the attitude that I only wanted to kiss one woman, and that was my wife, and that would be for the first time on our wedding day. But that kind of guy doesn't get any girls at all.
So sad, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
really, really so sad.
yes.
Jeez. So what are, just now, quick questions before we close. What are the 2 or 3 things that you think you need to be happy?
Me personally, or human beings in general?
You personally.
Me personally, mathematics. As I said before, I think I love math more than people. That actually wasn't true. I do love math more than people. So I would need to do math. But I do like having material comforts. I don't know if I would enjoy doing math if I were starving or something. So as long as I have those needs met, and then I do understand that female companionship and then some, that's also important. Um, but math is a lot easier than figuring out how to get that.
Yeah, so far so good, I guess.
Mhm.
So, in your travel, do you use Airbnb, hotels, or how do you choose places to live? Or have you ever tried couch surfing before?
I have not, no. I like staying at good places where you're not going to get bed bugs. But, I mostly travel when I'm going on a conference. So when I went to Cape Town, they invited me for that conference at the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences. And then I figured I'm going all this way. I'll just stay for 3 weeks. And so I was just in hotels. They actually got me a great apartment in Wissenberg, it had, I think, 3 bedrooms. Like there are 8 large windows in it in one of the main rooms, a kitchen and all of that. So it was actually a gigantic apartment. But I just prefer to stay in places like that. But I can find when I'm traveling on my own and not when I've been invited by someone. I use there's a travel guide called Lonely Planet,
Yeah, I love
and
Lonely
they
Planet.
have, yeah, I love it now. They have a mix of uh, say places to stay, low end, in the middle, and high end. So you can choose. I usually don't take the low end places, but there are lots of good places that you can find. And then also what I do is I used to use I used to use a travel guide called Let's Go, because that was geared towards students when I was much younger. But because it was geared towards students, then they would have lower cost options for people, but which were places that were still good, or restaurants that were cheap but still good. And so that's what I would recommend to people who want to travel.
So one more thing, are you religious?
I certainly admire Jesus.
Okay.
I think the New Testament is great. The lessons from the New Testament are great. And I have several books by an American preacher named Joel Osteen. I love his books. When I'm with my mother, we watch his TV program. You might say we watch it religiously. So to that extent, I guess so.
So being so analytical, how does that play out?
Well, what I see is that the messages of the Bible are actually great messages. So the messages are great, and it would be great if everybody lived like that. But even personally, for example, one of the problems I had with the New Testament for decades was this idea of forgiving people, even if they didn't repent. I always thought, no. I don't like the idea of forgiveness anyway, if someone did something really horrible. But at worst, you forgive them if they repent, or at best, you forgive them if they repent and ask for forgiveness, beg for forgiveness. But now I see that there is sense to this idea of forgiving because it tears you up. It burns you up inside. It makes your life worse to be harboring this anger. And so it actually makes sense.
So do you have any practices, really just practices that you do or perform?
No, I don't. I just read people like Joel Osteen. And as I said, I admire Jesus. I can see why Christianity is the biggest religion. And I don't want to be a relativist, but I can also see the value in some other religions, like, someone like Malcolm X, because he converted, could become the person that he became. And that's happened to many other people who were even criminals. They converted, not just to Christianity, but then became great people. So I can see the power in at least one other religion. But, I really admire the tenets of Christianity. And I think Jesus was a great person.
Great. By the way, A.J. Jacobs, I don't know if you know about him. He's kind of like a guinea pig.
No.
He actually tried to live by the rules of the Bible, and he has great stories to tell about that. Yeah, I will send you a link.
Okay.
You can listen to the podcast, which he actually mentioned that.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway.
But I'm not saying that I live like Jesus. I'm just saying that I admire.
Oh, okay, great.
I admire him, yeah.
All right. So, any books that you'd recommend for people to read about the subjects we have covered on both podcasts?
So, in terms of books, there's no specific book that when it comes to relationships that I would say people need to read. But there are many books dealing with pickup artist techniques. There's a website, Return of Kings, which has some objectionable material, like they're constantly attacking. Even parts of it are kind of racist, but the material on interacting with women is pretty helpful to men who don't have a clue. When it comes to mathematics, if you're into math, then you don't need the recommendation of any book, I guess. But if people are interested in aspects of the history of math, I can recommend a BBC documentary called Letters from an Indian Clerk. And there's another BBC documentary called Fermat's Last Theorem, which is excellent. And both of these documentaries are about 50 minutes long. So if people are interested in understanding what mathematicians do, what moves us, I could recommend those films.
Great. Could you just send the names via text or links somehow, just so that I can put them in the show notes as well?
I'll do that.
Great. Okay, thanks so much for your time, Jonathan. I really appreciate it. It has been so much fun. I don't get a chance to find people that think like that and kind of discuss these kind of ideas.
Well, thank you for reaching out to me and for the interview.
Great.
I enjoyed it.
And right before you go, a reminder, this was the part 1 of my conversation with Dr. Farley. Everything that was mentioned in the show will be in the show notes, so make sure you check those out, whether it's books, links, and everything like that. And there is on the podcast website a link to get free audiobooks. So you can just use that link and get some of the books that you're interested to read or what Dr. Farley mentioned, and you can just listen to them for free. Just make sure you use the link that is provided on the podcast. There is part 2 where we covered the details of his formula about ISIS and other areas that we didn't cover in this podcast, like the mathematics side of things. And I asked a few questions to some of you directly on what you think I should ask him. So I haven't covered those yet in this podcast we just listened to, but on the next one it's all there. So just be on the lookout and subscribe if you haven't, so that as soon as it's out,